Good evening, friends. Good evening, as we have been talking about the new issue release for LitInfinite Journal and also how we circulated that we will be having a special guest with us tonight. We are going to launch volume 3, issue 1 for LitInfinite Journal today, which is on reading Shakespeare from a multidisciplinary approach. And with us, we have today one of the most acclaimed international poets, editorial directors, and also we have an artist par excellence. We have poet Sudeep Sen with us for today's evening, for today's session. Welcome, Sudeep sir, to Lit Infinite Show and the launching of the volume 3, issue 1 of our journal. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. My pleasure. Looking forward.
And we have amongst us Heather Ann Shepard, madam, who is collaborating with Sudeep sir for a music and poetry project taken together. So we welcome Heather Ann Shepard, ma'am, also from our journal, from Lit Infinite. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. So before we move forward, we have a volley of questions for Sudeep sir today, where he will be talking about Anthropocene, the book that I have reviewed in this issue for Late Infinite Journal. We will be talking about his new poems, pandemic poems. We will be talking about his own stories of love and pandemic and how there was this change of everything from the earlier phase of life. So before we move on, a very short introduction about our guest today. Those who are here for our friends tonight, Sudeep Sen's prize winning books include Postmarked India, New and Selected Poems from HarperCollins, Rain, Arya, A.K. Ramanujan Translation Award for it, Fractals, New and Selected Poems, Translations 1980 to 2015, London Magazine editions, Erotext, Vintage, Penguin Random House, Kaifi Azmi poems, which came out from Ann Nazam's Bloomsbury, and Anthropocene, Climate Change, Contagion, Consolation from Piper and Books. He has edited influential anthologies, including the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, World English Poetry, and Modern English Poetry by Young Indians, Sahitya Academy, Blue Nude, Ekphrasis, and New Poems, and The Whispering Anklets are forthcoming. We also have Sudeep sir's works, which have been translated into over 25 languages. His words have appeared in the Times Literary Supplement, Newsweek, Guardian, Observer, Independent, Telegraph, Financial Times, Herald, Poetry Review, Literary Review, Independent, Harvard Review, Hindu, Hindustan Times, and also broadcast on BBC, PBS, CNN, IBN, NDTV, Air, and Doordarshan. His newer work appears in New Writing 15 from Granta Books, Language for a New Century from Norton, Leela, which is an erotic play of verse and art, Indian love poems, Out of Bounds, and he is also the editorial director along with his poetry. He is also taking a huge responsibility as an editorial director of Arc Arts and currently the inaugural artist in residence at the Museo Camera. So we welcome Sudeep sir to our show today, and we will start with the question answers later. But we want to know about Anthropocene first before we move on to anything else. About your work, Anthropocene.
So, Anthropocene is my new book, and as the subtitle suggests, it's to do with climate change, the pandemic, and the last section is Consolation, which is essentially a book that I wanted to end on hope and positivity, which is why the last section is on there. It's a book that has largely been written in the last 2 years, so it's absolutely brand new work. It normally takes 4 or 5 years for a book to come together in my case, but during the lockdown, one was isolated and contained in one space, so not much was happening, though everything else was happening. Terrible things were happening, but essentially one could focus a lot on writing, thinking, and revising, and you cannot but not respond to what's happening around you. It's one of the biggest historical events I've seen in my life that has happened. The closest I can think of is the stories my grandparents told me about the partition of India and the war and the terrible times that took place there. But in my lifetime, I haven't seen something as cataclysmic as this. Bodies burning on the sides of the road and in parking lots and things. So you cannot possibly not respond to this. But the pandemic is only one part of the book. The larger part is climate change, which is Anthropocene. Now, I look at pandemic as only one aspect of climate change. And again, climate change is something that, it's impossible to be, not be aware of it because it's happening all around us. Look at what's happening in Europe right now, the floods, the earthquakes, and everything is, abnormal. Right now in Delhi, the temperatures are 10 degrees more than it should be. There are rains where there were no rains. There's drought where there was water before. So everything is in a topsy-turvy situation. So I've been engaged with the whole notion of climate change. I've written poetry, prose around it. But this was an opportunity to bring it all together as a book. And in fact, when the book came out, the pandemic had the second phase of the pandemic had finished, which was a great thing. We all thought it was good. And we said, but I was publisher and I was thinking that, okay, well, the book is not going to be timely anymore. But that was important. And there we are, we are still amid the whole thing. So yes, that's how the book happened. I would say 80% of the work was written in the last 1.5 years, and then 20% is work prior to that, which fitted into this book.
If we are just going through the different segments that are there in the book, we notice that there are those multifaceted ideas that are related to pandemic, and also how things are very unsettling right in the beginning, as we have been seeing in some of the modern works and postmodern works, where we see Eliot's writing coming up with images. And your poems are so very imbued with that deep sense of uncertainty due to pandemic, and then again things coming to a kind of settling phase, so almost completing a kind of circular motion, you can say. So how do you think that life changed after pandemic, if we are just going for this rise and fall, the ebb and tide of how you look at poetry, the words that change, the scenario that changes, the themes that keep on changing? How did it affect and inspire you to write this book, Anthropocene? What were the external or internal stimuli, if we are talking about that?
Yeah.
What excited you to write?
Well, the thing is, normally I would use the word inspire for poetry and art, but it's very difficult to use a word like inspire when there's so much negativity and despair around. So it was the urgency of the situation that prompted me to write, I would say. I mean, it's an odd kind of inspiration, but it's the urgency of the situation that made me write. But I wanted to make sure, as I said before, I wanted to construct the book in a way that the takeaway from the book ends on positivity and hope. Because without hope, there's no way we can continue living. There's so much of grimness and negativity all around us. And if we just focus on that, there's going to be no way, just waking up the next day becomes very difficult. The kinds of problems people are facing, especially people who live alone. Mental health has become a big issue. There are so many allied things that have happened. So it was very important for me to not only just highlight issues of this urgent time, climate change, of course, and then pandemic, which we are still currently in. It's not past. It's going to be still a while. Some countries are enjoying a better space, but a country like India, we are still largely in lockdown. We can't travel out. But
Exactly.
consolation, the section consolation is precisely for that, that, it's ultimately it's hope. So obviously there's a circularity in
Hmm.
construction. And ebb and flow, of course, because that's how life works. It's diurnal and nocturnal, it's yin and yang. Everything is, in a sense, bipolar. If you think about it, all our life is like that, because if you imagine our old school models of taking a
Hmm.
ruler and taking a little object in the middle, a triangle in the middle, and that's the fulcrum, and we balance a
Absolutely.
seesaw.
Absolutely.
It just depends on how we calibrate and move the fulcrum. The weight changes. For me, it's always going to be like that. What we need to aspire to, hopefully, is a sense of harmony and unity and positivity, and that's the whole thing. I mean, Heather is here. We'll get into that project much later during the show, but one of the delights has been just to engage with creative projects together. Two people who haven't met but only have met through their work, and then something beautiful can come out of it. So those are just wonderful things to look forward to. The ultimately, let's face it, it's the human beings who are angst ridden. The sun
Exactly.
goes about its daily life. It rises regardless of things. The plants come out, the birds come and feed, the rivers continue flowing. Everything else actually continues as it should. It's we who have become so narrow minded and over ambitious and less collegial, and because of obvious effects of many infrastructural and industrial, political, also, of course, engagements, that the world's balance has shifted and changed. And the thing is, it would have changed probably later. That's the way it is. The world also goes through a churn. Civilizations come up, they get destroyed, things get rebuilt again. So it's part of a larger cycle, and we are just living in that phase of a larger cycle that is seeing an end and destruction. However, can we lose hope? No, because if we are living in a world of doom and gloom, we won't be doing anything. Life becomes
Exactly.
hopeless. So, things, you just have to look around and then realize that it's okay. The skies can be still blue, the rain falls, it's beautiful. Look at the beauty, hopefully.
Absolutely. So that's again one point. It's a kind of continuation that we see when you are writing Anthropocene, writing about nature, taking up environmental issues, talking about the kind of distractions that we have during the time of pandemic. That is, of course, a phase that we find. But how would you say, like you have been writing a lot about environment, you talked about the third pole, you talked about extremities in nature, and also the balanced way that you were saying just now. So from your early poems that you have written, how do you think Anthropocene differs, I mean, from the perspective of a reader, if we are taking that for an
Well,
instance?
you as an academic should answer that question for me. I just continue. I mean, I can answer it, of course, but I just write. I just respond and write. And to me, to me, I just set different challenges depending on the kind of circumstance one is in. So, you can call an academic can easily argue that some of the academics are writing papers about me being a nature poet. I never thought of myself being a nature poet. I'm not a
Yeah, and
nature
there
poet
are
as such.
technical terms and everything. You
Yeah,
keep on
yeah.
talking about
But
eco-critical aspects and everything.
yes, so the
But
whole the essay of the eco-critical eco-criticism, so that's sort
hmm,
of a new academic trend. So it happens to fit in there. I mean, I wrote a book 5 years ago
hmm,
called Rain.
hmm, hmm,
Uh, it, it, I didn't set out to write a nature book or thinking that I'll write
hmm,
about the environment. I was just living in Bangladesh at the time. And in West Bengal and Bangladesh, the ferocity and the beauty of rain is just magical. It both arouses and douses. It's both destructive and it's romantic. And so I was in that space, so I was surrounded by this whole ferocity and beauty of rain. So I ended up writing on rain, and I realized over a period of a year, I've got enough written which can form a book. So that's how that book happened, And that was a collaboration too. Initially the book, the Bangladeshi edition, it's a beautiful book. It's got black and white photographs and silver tones, and my prose poetry. And a wonderful photographer there called Mahmood did the black and white photographs. It's a beautiful, beautiful edition.
Somehow, I think that actually, encapsulates this entire concept of rain, the
Yes,
silver
yes.
color, the black backgrounds, and everything.
Yeah, and that was the rain I envisioned. I mean, I'm very fond of black and white photography as well as color. But and then that book was sent to an editor in India, a lady called Beena Sarkar Elias, who's a fine poet and a wonderful, wonderful editor of a magazine called Gallery International. And she got the book. She writes in the introduction, this little gem came bubble wrapped all the way from Dhaka. When we didn't do things like courier, it took a while to get to her. And part of the packet was battered and so on. And then she was so inspired. She says, why don't I do a special issue on rain? So she, based on that book, she commissioned artists and poets, writers, filmmakers. So the entire issue became an issue of rain, and she had commissioned all these beautiful paintings by these painters, which were part of the issue. So, but by the time I'd moved back to India, and the monsoon edition was not available to me, and she said, that issue of Rain sold so well. So then we decided, why don't we just do a book together called Rain? So then what she did was she designed the book. She took the paintings that were in the magazine and then rechristened the book called Rain, which is the version that is available now. So, so there are 20 Indian, 20 Indian painters who are in the book, who I haven't commissioned, but it was done by the editor herself, and it's turned out to be another very beautiful book. You're on mute, Shritoni.
Yes. I think I'm audible now. So that is the entire story that we have behind rains, and how this entire poetic silhouette I see that keeps on changing. So as you rightly said, from an academic perspective, if we see, it's more about those technicalities, the academic jargon that we actually are so prone to use. That is one thing. But for the spontaneous flow of emotions,
prone is another word that is widely used.
That is widely used, easy to use and widely used.
And the prone position.
So, in this connection, can we just go on with the next question, or I think it's better if we can just move on with your reading.
Yes, let me just read a few poems, because that will give an idea of
yes.
Otherwise,
the audience will also just get to know.
Because to me, that is the most important thing. Everything else, all our conversation, all the sort of glib talk and erudition and academia is all very well. But what is the most important thing? The soul, the music, and the poetry. So let me read a few poems. And so this one is called Disembodied. It's the second poem in the book. And it was written actually before the pandemic started. But remember, Delhi is one of the most polluted cities in the world. So, and I'm asthmatic, so it's very, very difficult to kind of exist, especially during certain months. And in the winter months and certain months, the pollution level goes really, really high. So that was partly the prompt. But the rest of it, you can see, it's both local and global. Disembodied. My body carved from abandoned bricks of a ruined temple, from minaret shards of an old mosque, from slate remnants of a medieval church apse, from soil tilled by my ancestors. My bones don't fit together correctly as they should. The searing ultraviolet light from aurora borealis patches and etch corrects my orientation. Magnetic pulses prove potent. My flesh, sculpted from the fruits of the tropics, blood from coconut water, skin colored by brown bark of Indian teak, My lungs, fueled by Delhi's insidious toxic air, echo asthmatic sounds, a new vinyl dub remix. Our universe where radiation germinates from human follies, where contamination persists from mistrust, where pleasures of sex are merely a sport, where everything is ambition, everything is desire, everything is nothing, nothing and everything. White light everywhere, but no one can recognize its hue. No one knows that there is color in it, all possible colors. Body worship, not for its blessing, but its contour, artificial shape shaped by Nautilus, skin moistened by L'Oreal and not by season's first rains, skeleton strength not shaped by the earthquakes or slow molded by fearless forest fires. Ice caps are rapidly melting, too fast to arrest glacial slide. In the near future, there will be no water left or too much water that is undrinkable, excess water that will drown us all. Disembodied floats afloat like Noah's Ark. No GPS, no pole star navigation, no fossil fuel to just maps with empty grids and places and names of places that might exist. Already, there is too much traffic on the road. Unpeopled, hollow metal shells without brakes swerve about, directionless, looking for an elusive compass.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's a lovely poem that we have. And, just the way that you have projected the place, the compass, the idea of changing places, changing scenario. So
Yeah.
we will have one more of your poems and then we can just move on. Like I was so
Okay.
engrossed. Yes.
So this one is called Obituary. This was written at the early stages of the pandemic. And I was completely struck with this two front page covers, which you should see. These are the front, oops, am I doing it right? Yeah, there we go.
Yes,
So
front
these are the
page
front
cover.
pages of the New York Times. The lower one is basically just a series of names of people who had died with an headline. And the other one is just the front page is completely black. And you can see, just so it's just such a stark image. So this particular poem is called Obituary, and I simply use the headline from one of those as an epigraph. And I quote, "They were not simply names on a list, they were us. Death knells peal, numbers multiply, virus ravages us one by one. Newspaper columns loom unsteady, ghostly apparitions on broadsheets, name, age, date of death, tall epitaphs in fine print. Ink spills, bleeds dark, newsprint blotting out our wheezing breath. No amount of hygiene ritual enables our lungs to resuscitate. Our lives, micropoint size fonts on an ever inflating pandemic list, black specks, fugitive lonely numbers, the deceased on an official roster, another sick, another dying, another dead. Yes, they were us."
It's actually very deep and very stark, as you say, the kind of image that you have used. Of course, that brings us to my next question that I was just going to ask about the style of Anthropocene, the kind of style that you have used in your earlier poems, and what kind of style as a poet that we find that you have experimented with in Anthropocene? Like, of course, the spontaneous ideas that are, of course, there. You are jotting down your emotions, the images all around you. But then, is there a very conscious way of putting a kind of experimental style somewhere? Or the way that you try to bring in something new as far as the style of Anthropocene is concerned?
So it's not just for Anthropocene. For all my books, you'll see that
Mhm.
I'm very, very conscious about language, and it's just very important to bow down to the sanctity of language itself. I'll read a poem called Language after this, maybe to just illustrate that.
Of course.
Um, of course, the beginning of a poem, the inspiration, it could be the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, the Wordsworthian idea, or the Coleridgean idea of emotions recollected in tranquility. Of course, that is important. Without that, the rest of the work won't exist. But that is only for me a lump of clay in front of me. The inspiration, the content is there, but it's unshaped and unformed. Many amateur writers and poets and artists, if they're amateur, they will put it out just like that, saying that this is what I feel. Okay, so if this is what I feel is great, but it may not be good art or good writing. So it takes a long time to sculpt that particular piece of clay to something that's has some element of formal shape, musicality, circularity, circulation. So it's what the sculptor does with that, lump of clay, just chisels it and shapes it and gives it a particular shape. The shape then, shows the vision of the artist, and then it's open to various interpretations. So I have to dispel this fact, that poetry and music, whoa, how beautiful and transcendental. But a lot of it is very, very banal and clerical. Once we have the material, to get it right
Exactly.
takes a long time. So that's where the editing and form is concerned. We'll be talking about the two song and poetry films, which we'll screen, and 90% of the work was done. Heather liked the poem, she sang it, she thought about the composition, and then eventually sung it, and then there was a final version. And when the song was done, it's complete, it's beautiful. But then came the idea of doing the video. And then even once you lay it out, there's so many things that
So we have so
are
many mediums.
completely
The video is there.
unromantic, nothing to do with the original soul of the song or the poem, like credits and timing and editing tools and
Right.
fonts. So the thing is, ultimately, there's a lot of hard work, and
And
an
you are using so many
athlete
mediums,
goes to the
like
gym,
not
to
the
be.
poem, but you are also using so many other mediums. It's
Yeah,
actually
so this
used
particular
in a
book, yeah,
video,
you're right.
in
This particular book,
the song.
this particular book, unlike many of my other books, is
Mhm.
multi-genre. So it's got both poetry and prose and photography.
Right.
I didn't plan it this way, but that's how I
Mhm.
was responding to the pandemic and Anthropocene, I realized. And then, normally photographs are not printed in a book because it's just expensive. So publishers don't want to print 4-color pictures. That's really why it doesn't happen. But in this case, everything came together, and I was pleased because that's why I have to call it. It's not just a poetry book; it's a multi-genre book. So then each one has its own dynamics, and then the way I had to then structure it accordingly, because you're moving from poetry to prose to experimental writing to photography, back to poetry, to meditative writing, fragmented writing. I mean, certainly disembodied sounds very lyrical when I read it out because I know exactly where the pauses are.
Hmm.
But on the page, you'll see the layout is very fragmentary because I wanted to show the fragmentary nature of the situation right now. So it's also a visual comment. So yes, various forms have been used, and even within poetry, there's haiku, and then there's use of couplets and the sonnets, and all sorts of things, The formal aspect of poetry to me is very, very important because it provides the basic backbone and architecture of the art. I mean, it's very rarely that you can come up with something very formless and spontaneously, and it turns out to be fabulous.
Exactly.
Rarely. I mean, one out of
Yes.
100 maybe,
Process that slowly,
But
gets for that
most
formation.
of
Very slow.
most of the work you require many days, months of editing and shaping, which a lot of young people don't do. Unfortunately, they write a poem at night. They've had a fight with someone, or they've broken up with someone, or they're in love, and they write this piece, and then they put it up on Facebook. Next morning, they get 5 likes, and the 6th one is from Uzbekistan, and then they suddenly call themselves internationally famous. I mean, it's a real problem. I mean, I'm all for democracy in social media, but the serious work sometimes gets, but any serious reader, any sensitive reader would know which work is what ultimately. So,
Of
yeah.
course, because when we are talking about again this media thing, a very distracted one from my actual set of questions, but things do come up when we are talking about the effects of social media. How are the things projected? And since you talked, this was just an example where you talked about these likes and everything, but social media definitely, it has a certain picture, like what is in and how it's moving on, how it's becoming popular, who are making it popular. So even then that is a question, but the ultimate thing that you said, of course it matters. We can differentiate. My question will be, which is connected to this, do you think that there is anything called good poetry and bad poetry as such, when we are using that filtering scheme, so as to say anything that is good
Woo.
poetry, this is good, like this is very
Yeah, there is
controversial
good
question,
poetry.
but
There
then
is good poetry and bad poetry, I have to say. I have a strong opinion on that. See, um, a poem or any piece of writing, if it's done well, will appeal to a large set of people, regardless of whether they agree with the content, whether the politics are aligned. If it's well constructed, well argued, it's a piece that works. Um, but bad writing includes very sloppy construction of sentences, often huge amounts of grammatical error. Again, there's this notion that just because it's poetry, you can split up a line into 3 parts, arrange it in a column, and these days with a computer and a good laser printer, you can put a nice font and print it out. And they said, gosh, this looks great. Yeah, it can look great, but it may not be good writing. So there is, like any art, there is good art and bad art. And I'm not putting it hierarchically, it also depends on mood. So for instance, when I use the word in a different context, high art and low art, I'm fond of both. Now, high art traditionally would mean classical music, a certain kind of poetry, a certain kind of literary writing. And low art would be sort of street graffiti, street food, not gourmet, as in, overly expensive food. But, frankly, I like both. Both have their fabulous textures and beauty. Low art has to be done also really well. So low art can be very good art if it's done well, because it still has to be tasty and still has to work and still has to work in that particular context. But yes, bad writing is bad writing. There's just no way out of it. So when I'm editing, when I'm selecting poetry, very quickly within line 3, 4, I don't even have to go down to stanza 2 that I know this poem's not going to last until the next page or the end of the page. I mean, usually I'm patient and I'll read through it. But yeah, you can, anybody can ultimately, with a good eye and ear and training, you don't even need the training actually, can distinguish what is acceptable and what is not. And I'm not talking about acceptability in terms of political and cultural beliefs. See, you may write a poem. I may completely disagree with the character. It might be an heinous character and, completely against my political views. But if I still feel that the poem is well constructed, well written, and I can read it out and it's musical, I'll still say it's a piece of good writing. I don't agree with you, but that doesn't mean anything. So that's
Uh-huh.
what I mean by good and bad writing. So yes,
Okay.
there is definitely a lot of bad writing and a lot of good writing too. So you just have
I
to
think
choose.
that clarity was needed. That is why I asked you, because with the flurry of poems coming up, we see, as you said, with this proliferation of these social media networks, networking channels coming up, YouTube channels, and every channel. So somehow it becomes very difficult at times. Of course, when the technicalities are involved, people do understand like what is good, what is bad, or as an editor, it's easy for you, as you said, if you just start reading you can understand. But for the common audience, or for those who love to read poetry, I think somehow that filtration becomes very difficult after a certain point of time with the flurry of poems that are coming in.
Yeah, so
So
ultimately things like music, poetry, art, beyond
mhm,
a certain point is a fairly serious
mhm,
venture. It's fun, and it's also meant for the masses, but if you're engaged in that, then you'll already over time through experience have a training. Sometimes you're trained formally, and sometimes just by the virtue of sheer amount of time you've put in. Like, I mean, I've been writing for 35 odd years. It's almost second nature. It's like driving a car, which gear to shift. And when you're
absolutely.
making a mistake. And when you're making a mistake, you try and do it better. So all those things come in any case. So when it comes to social media, I mean, in general, I'm okay with it because you know everything is there and the good will rise. you know uh, and the people who don't see the good are not making an effort. And if you're not really making an effort, then this is not for you. In any case, would I want my work to be read by uninterested people? No, not
Of
really. I
course, of
much
course.
rather have five really good dedicated readers who like and dislike my work but can engage with it and it can argue with me intellectually. That's more meaningful than, say, 10 more people buying my book and smiling and taking a
Mhm.
selfie and getting an autograph, but then they keep it in their, library shelves saying, oh, it's a beautiful book, but they haven't read it. So you ultimately, what is important.
Absolutely. So, on this note, I think we can just move on with another reading that you have, and then we can just come to the next question. But one poem from you, yes.
Okay, so we were talking about language and sanctity of language. I
Language.
think, yeah. So today I think this was rereading Auden, and I saw a line from Auden and I put it up on Facebook, and it was just something about ultimately a poet's obsession and fascination is nothing but for language. Language is the muse, language is the lover, language is your wife, husband, ex wife, people who've hated you, people who've loved you. That is your soul. That's what it is. And let's face it, for every piece of verbal art, whether it's music or dance is classical Indian dance,
Mhm.
as you know, is sung, is danced to sung songs. And what are songs? It's sung poetry, which you'll see in any case very soon. So yeah, because we're talking about language, let me just read a poem called Language. And of course, partly it talks about my old fascination with paper. I'm just completely crazy about handmade paper, old typewriter, you know, ink, fountain pens, pencils. Call me old fashioned, but I just love all
The,
that.
the
So
the kind of fondness that we have for nostalgia, the fondness
it's
to
not
look back,
nostalgia,
and
it's
it's
also
all those things
tactility.
which have those memories, those
Yes.
which are attached, moments and memories which are attached to these things. If you are calling,
Sure, sure.
yeah,
But
in
also
that case, the
beyond that, for me,
typewriter.
it's about
Hmm,
tactility. When I'm
exactly.
writing with a fountain pen on handmade paper, the
Hmm.
beautiful sound it makes,
Hmm.
because handmade paper is not consistent. So
Hmm.
every sheet you're writing on creates a different frequency. Sometimes
Hmm.
the nib breaks, the ink spills and makes a particular kind of pattern. It can never be replicated, you know. So the beauty of that is very, very different. Any
Yes.
case, this is called Language. And it has a epigraph from Italo Calvino, and I quote: Without translation, I would be limited to the borders of my own country. The translator is my most important ally. My typewriter is multilingual, its keys mysteriously calibrating my bipolar forked tongue. Black red silk ribbon spools unwind as the carriage moves from right to left. In cursive hand, I write from left to right. My tongue was born promiscuous, speaking in many languages. My heart spoke another, my head yet another, the translation seamless. Auricles, ventricles pump blood, corpuscle-like alphabets, phrases, syntax cross-fertilize my text, breathing life. Texture enriched, music, cadence spatially enhanced, osmotic, polyglottal, a polygamy of grammar. Letter forms dance, ligatures, pirouette, ascenders, descenders, pitch perfect. Language isn't caged in speech. Speech cannot be caged in language.
Lovely poem. Lovely way of putting how language cannot be caged. I think that speaks a lot about how, the freedom of language, the freedom of ideas, and the spontaneity of emotions and images, how do they keep on hovering as part of your poems? That brings me to one question that we have from one of our audience. This one part of the question you had already explained about this good and bad poetry when we were talking about this. But Professor Ketoki Dotto, she is an associate professor of English. She has this question: can we really demarcate good poetry from bad poetry? Of course, the one that you answered.
Yeah.
She has the second half of her question, which is: can we put the two in such watertight compartments? Is that possible?
No, no, definitely not. I mean, anything that is so tight and rigid is problematic. That's why terrorism or extremism happen, because it's so tight and rigid. So we need the osmosis and the free flow of ideas between the compartments, of course. So no, no, nothing is watertight. Everything is breathable and porous. That's the beauty of language and art and everything, life, really. You know, if even if someone's done something horrible to you, the only way to counter it is not to do something horrible back, which is what the natural human instinct tends to be, but really, in a Buddhist or a larger way, is to forgive and move on. Uh, it's a stage that you come to much later on in your life, because it's not easy to forgive. But if you forgive and let go, you're cleaning your vessel out from, to a point that you're fresh all the time. So nothing is watertight and compartmentalized. But certainly, yes, good quality and bad quality, of course, you can judge. And it's very important that they are sifted. That's why in sports you have the first division league and the second division league and the third division league and the Premier League. So the teams progress up. The better skilled you are, the better you are, you go up. And that's how things are. That's how things are.
Right.
There's space for
Uh,
everything.
Yes. So that's it. I think Professor Datta's second part of the question, this is what is explained. One more question we have in general, of course, we have from Mr. Supriyo Chakraborty, who is working with a state university. He also has these defining characteristics of a lyric poem. He asks about this. Definition of lyric poetry, of course, he has asked this question, but if I just combine this, what lyrical qualities do we find in your new work, Anthropocene? How do you experiment with lyrical qualities? I will not ask this exactly characteristics of lyric poem, but of course, talking about your poems, how do
So
you
the
retain
the lyric the
lyrical
lyric
qualities?
aspect of my poetry is incredibly important. One of my final stages of editing, I mean, after I do my 10th, 11th, 12th, 15th edit of a poem, I start editing not with a piece of paper and a pen or my pencil, but I actually edit with my nose. I actually nose around the poem with my ear. It's the how it sounds becomes very important. So I read it out to myself constantly, and every time I can catch, is there an extra syllable there, or should the comma be changed to
Mm-hmm.
a full stop? Should there be a line break here? Is the pause half a millisecond more? All those things come in. I also try, if it's possible, to get the poem read out by a female voice, because it's important for me to hear it, how it sounds from a child also, and a male voice. And somewhere then you sort of calibrate, think of a sound studio. You have this enormous board in front of you with a million knobs in front of you,
Hmm.
and how you calibrate the bass tones and the treble and the mid range. That's really what you're doing. Creating harmonics in a way that suits your vision and your blood corpuscle. So everybody wants their piece of art to sound or look or seem in a particular way. Also depends on what you want to achieve with that particular writing. So yes, the lyric quality is very, very important. In fact, when I read Disembodied, when you look at it on the page, it's very, very fragmented to look at. But when you yourself commented, it's such a lyrical poem. So ultimately, I think, the lyric quality is very, very important for me. And I also come from that particular tradition, where song is so important and integral in our culture. It's all around me. Music is all around me. For Bengalis
And you
particularly,
you keep on referring to,
yeah,
I think
and for Bengalis
Tagore is,
especially,
yeah,
you know.
Tagore is much repeated when we talk about these songs. And
Yeah,
in
Tagore,
your
I
poems
mean,
also,
Tagore,
you keep on referring to songs, so they form an integral part of your writing.
yeah, songs as well as art. So it's
Of
it's
course.
ekphrastic. It's ekphrastic in many ways, because I also respond a lot to art, and I respond a lot to music. I mean, a piece of I remember listening to a piece of minimalistic music by Ryuicho Kamachi. He's
Mm-hmm.
a sort of he has these amazing instruments, and I listened to him for a few hours in a Zen-like space, and I just wrote a poem in response to it, because it was just so wonderfully rich, but so sparse and elegant and uplifting. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. See, without the lyric, the text will never rise. We have this thing, the rosh, the
Hmm.
ras.
The
Rosh
rasa,
na hole
yeah,
kichu hobe na. You know,
exactly.
then it becomes staccato and academic and flat. Both content and musicality has to work simultaneously to make it holistic and meaningful. So sometimes, a person is listening to the poem and enjoys the
Mm.
musicality and the oral quality of the poem, and that attracts him or her to read the poem on the page. And when they read it on the page, they get a different dimension of the poetry.
And
So
of
yes,
course, when you read out, so that ear, the way that
very
one
important,
listens,
very
even if
important.
I don't read it, if I just go through when you are reading, I close my eyes, and when you read out, I just have those lines, so that creation of the
That's
image.
that's that that's how I've grown up with poetry. I mean, Qazi Nazrul Islam's his son,
Hmm, hmm,
Bolabir. I mean,
hmm.
when he starts that poem, you get, or Banulata Shain. The when you hear the Bangla, it's just stunning. You get goosebumps in your on your skin. So
Exactly.
the AURAL and ORAL qualities both are crucially the yin and yang of the sonics of
Right.
any writing. Yeah.
Right. So we are not just having guests today who are commenting on the show. They're talking to the poet. They are having so many questions for our guest today. So one by one. So it's so nice of you. That will bring me to my next question. Otherwise, I won't be able to move forward. I see people are asking so many questions. So my
Yeah.
next question that will be, of course, we talked about music. We talked about poetry, good poetry, bad poetry. A very sensitive part. We come to your understanding of love. how do you see, you talked about this entire section which is pandemic, love in the time of corona. So what is your opinion about this separation and love and estrangement that happened, during this phase, the phase of the pandemic, or in general? I mean, love that inspires you to write, love in poetry. How do you see that? What is your
I
opinion?
mean, the right person to answer such a question would be a psychologist or a psychiatrist, neither of which I am. But I'll give it a go. Of course, love, it's one of those most overused word to the point that it can almost lose its sort of romantic currency. And as you know, love changes over time. When you're young, it's a certain kind of love. When you're a teenager, it's a certain kind of love. When you're in your midlife, it's a certain kind of love. And then you're in your old age, it's a certain kind of manifestations of love changes. Then what is love? Spiritual, physical, intellectual. Um, so all those shades are explored
Right.
in my poetry, and also an aspect of it is highlighted depending on which poems of mine you're picking. My early
Hmm.
poems will obviously have a certain kind of shade of love.
Hmm.
Now, of course, you can't live without it, but it's a much more muted, understated way I show it. And in any case, I wrote a whole book called Erotext, and the whole idea of erotica is very, very important to me. And to me, just to give an idea, which is another side of love, really, or an aspect of love, what is really good quality erotic writing? Good quality your erotic writing to me is something that is actually just understated, which is just held back. If you say too much, if you describe too much, it enters the P space, the pornographic space. If it's undercooked, it's callow, like your high school love poems, bleeding heart type of thing.
Hmm.
But the really effective ones are the ones which skate on that thin blade, that line, which is just a suggestion, the old-fashioned way. A lot of classical poetry is like that, Persian poetry, Indian poetry. What is unsaid, what is simmering, is what is most exciting.
Lovely.
I mean, I can read a whole set of poems from that section, but we don't have the time. But maybe I should read one just to show you what I mean.
You can just read one, yes, of course,
Yeah, let me see if I can find
because
it.
one poem, yes, right now.
Okay, let me find it. Okay, let me just read this because I was trying to find another one, but this is fine too. This is called Silence. Silence has its own subtle color. Between each breath pause, heat simmers, latent saliva, tongue entwined lisp. Here and there, errant clouds wait, yearning for rain, desire melting even silence to words. Words color bleed in carnadine as your lips whisper softly the secrets of your silence. Your fine chicken blouse, white, sheer, and almost transparent, cannot hide the quiet of your heartbeat on your wheat olive skin. The milk white flower adorning your hair sheds a solitary petal, just one. In that petal, silence blooms color, white, transparent white, pure white silence.
Wonderful.
So to me, this is an erotic poem.
And
You don't
much
have to
of
lay
it,
it all out. Sorry?
that implicit sense, and much of what remains unsaid, the way
Yeah.
that you put it forth. So much of what it remains unsaid, I think that brings in the beauty of this, the simmering feeling that you told. So that's exactly the point that we should note. And our audience, they're also they're engrossed. They're coming up with questions, comments, and a lovely session that they have joined, and they are speaking to
Good. We'll
you.
get
And
to them. We can't see the
yes,
comments because we are on
yes,
StreamYard, but it's. I think
yes,
your
I'm just
Facebook is
posting
buzzing.
the questions as they're coming up. For our audience today, Heather Ann Shepard, she's living in Oberlin, Ohio, and holds an MFA in creative writing. So she's also a creative writer that we have. She is also an MA in English from National University. She teaches poetry and writing at Lorain County Community College. Her poems have appeared in journals such as Pennsylvania English, The City, and Up the Staircase Quarterly. Her newest collection of poems that are soon to be launched, I think they have already been launched or soon
No,
going to
I'm
be
trying to
launched.
find a home for him. It kind of
Okay,
fell
okay.
apart, so
Okay,
we'll
okay.
see.
So
Yeah.
it's called Owls and Angels: New and Collected Poems and Stories. So that collection will be released, I think, around 2022. That you are planning to do so, right?
I'm being optimistic, yes.
Right, right. So let's hope for the best. But then, just if you tell our audience what made you think about this collaboration as far as these poems were concerned into
Well,
songs.
luck. Well, Sudeep, I've followed Sudeep. The very first, it's so funny because you were talking about erotic poetry, and the very first book I ever got was the collection of Indian poems from Everyman's Library. And I read his poem Desire. Oh, wonderful poem. And became a huge fan. And that was like 13 or 14, well, whenever it was, 2008, I think, or a long time ago. And so then I started following him on Facebook, and he invited me to one of his wonderful conclave, and then he has another one, the Poets and Writers International Studio. And so I attended that, and it was wonderful. I learned a lot. And then afterwards, I just thanked him, and then he wrote me back and said, "Hey, I see you sing. I wanted to work with a poet to do music with my writing." And I thought, well, that'd be really cool. So he said, just, play around, look on poetry.org, see if you find a poem of mine that you like, and I'll, and see if anything happens. And so it did. And I had a lot of luck with that. I'm fairly new to GarageBand, and my husband is a sound engineer and has his own project studio. That's how I met him 10 years ago. We recorded together. And so I came up with some ideas, and I brought them to my husband, and he said, let's play around with these a little bit. And then I had an idea in my head about the lyrics and the melody. That's always what comes first. And then the video thing just happened because everyone's always like, "Oh, why don't you do music videos?" So in the last 3 months, I've had a crash course in iMovie. And poor Mr. Sudeep Sen here had to bear with me this week while I learned, I learned how to maneuver, especially the titles and things. But anyway, it came together very nicely. And I'm also in some classes right now learning about social media and film and things like that. So it has been an opportunity for me to develop that by working on these videos. And I think it's really nice when he has a presentation with the book, and we can talk about the collaboration, that there are some videos to share, so you can kind of visualize the imagery of the poem and hear the music, and it all kind of comes together for an experience,
So this is again a kind of how you have collaborated, both of you. Sudeep sir's poetry was there. He was making this into a song. You are talking about the sound recording, entire thing when you are doing. So, do you have any future projects in pipeline, like a series of his poems, which will be into this music film pattern, or this video kind of pattern? Have you thought about anything, like any future projects about which our audience can be intimated?
Yes, we would like to do a complete album, actually, based
Okay.
on Anthropocene and maybe some other works of his. And then, of course, in my heart and in my hope, I can come up with a video for each and every one of those. And then maybe we can do some presentations or something. It is such an important issue. I personally cannot do enough to talk about these things as a teacher, as a professor, getting in there with my students, talking about the importance of, it affects everything. It affects us internationally. The idea to me that's really important is that, it's not just here I am in the United States and we are one of the worst polluters. We are one of the most wasteful places. I live in a place that lives, we have about 80% carbon neutral in my city. We're very conscious of it. But I'd like to get people thinking about it. I think his book I think discussions like this, I think music,
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff, it's a very powerful medium to really talk about such an important issue. Make people aware of it, make them think about things, make them think about the impact that they have on other people, especially climate refugees. I mean, it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. We're going to have to open up our borders. We're going to have to help people.
Right.
And so I'm just, that's really kind of why I'm so passionate about this particular project of Mr. Sun's. It's very, very important.
It's actually when we are looking forward to some more videos and films that you have, especially when you told, because I have also told him that I'm working more on Anthropocene. We just had a talk, not about this review only, but some more write-ups, if we can come up some more academically oriented, in classrooms, then how do we teach these new poems? In
Yes,
classrooms
absolutely.
and beyond classrooms, how do we see them? So this is also the way that we look at his poetry. These will automatically come up. Like the last week when I was taking one of these classes, it automatically turned out that I referred to some of these poems, and I told that, okay, students, so you can just have a look at how it's changing, the dimensions, and how the way he's looking at the entire world. What is so new about Anthropocene? So these things beyond classroom, via these music videos, via these films, these two keep on coming. So that will, of course, bring me to my next question for Sudeep sir, about this Holocene part in Anthropocene. Holocene part, which talks about the freezing water. It talks about the volcanic rumblings, the water's mirrored sheen. And so, how do these intricacies in nature that we find in your poem, how do these affect the course of your poetic thought? Like, so intricate details and everything about nature in other poems also we have seen. How do they affect the course of of your poem? How do you think?
Yeah, I think when you're so deeply invested and immersed in the space, it automatically creates rivulets. It's like working with Heather. It's just been equally enthralling for me, because I think I don't know whether I told Heather this, but I said, you can do whatever you want with it, just don't change the lines. Sometimes songwriters just pick on like 2 or 3 lines and then
No.
completely change things, and it's fine, it can work. But just the way she 100% authentically stuck to the entire poem, but when it's sung out aloud, it's a completely different entity. It's so beautiful.
Hmm.
And of course, we've decided that we'll do different songs in
Hmm.
different styles, because it is possible if two people creatively put their head together to come
Hmm.
up with something. Because if you decide, say, we were talking about form before, so
Hmm.
we want to do something with rhythm and blues and jazz because we both like it. So suddenly, a different poem will appeal to a different set of people. The musical tones will, automatically determine um, who listens to it and what kind of visuals. Even just choosing the visuals was quite
The
a
visual, the auditory,
revelatory
these things
exercise, because
together. Yes.
you can put a different image behind the song has been done before.
Hmm.
That was frozen. My poem was frozen many years ago. The song was frozen.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, moment you put a different visual behind these two constants, the mood changes.
It's
So
true.
if you have water, then the mood changes. If you have this bright lightning, the mood changes. If you have the
Exactly.
soft leaves, the mood changes. So, you're playing with a lot of different things. And it's really exciting. The possibilities are endless. And
Hmm.
crucially, both of us are poets, you see. So we are fond of poetry. And then she's additionally talented, much beyond all of us, and she can sing so beautifully, and has a husband who's this brilliant sound engineer, so that's a great team. So
He's
it's
amazing.
all wonderful luck, as she said. And in
That
this day,
collaboration is very, this creative collaboration is important. How both of you thought about this and you put things into it, and how Heather, she actually encouraged, taking it into the form of a song. The
yes,
visuals, as you said, the
visuals
visuals are
came in.
so
Visuals came in
powerful.
much. Yeah, no, visuals came in much later. We
Much
didn't plan on the
later.
visual. Yeah,
Okay,
initially
okay.
it was just going to be
Hmm.
songs,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then the idea of it was her idea of putting it to to make a little video.
The
And then
music video
we are
kind of
still
thing.
learning that this whole visual thing is entirely done by Heather. It's just quite astonishing. She's still learning, but you wouldn't know that with these two videos that it's a person who's still learning the process, because we haven't hired any professional editor or cinematographer or lighting person. It's all done on a laptop. Okay, the two things that really work well is the poem has its own sanctity and integrity that one has spent time with, and then Heather, who's a wonderful singer, also has access to a wonderful person who is a top-notch sound engineer, and they have a studio. So we are able to bring two things at that level. So that's
Absolutely.
partly why it will work.
It clicked. That is what we say. It
It,
clicked at
it's
that
just
moment.
it's just luck and spontaneity, and that's the best part of this thing. And it's a journey. It's opened up to only difficulty with for us when we have to physically collaborate is our time zone difference. So
That's the thing.
when I can properly talk to her, it's usually 10, 11, 12, 1 o'clock at night, But that's okay. Hey, it's still possible to do. So it's a wonderful project. And now that we are going to do the album together, it'll open up various things. And then can you
Yeah, do
imagine when
tell
the
me when
lockdown?
I can have yet another show where that album can be
Yeah,
broadcast
we can do a
without
show
those
just
technical
on that.
glitches,
Yeah,
of course.
we can focus on just that.
Hmm.
Music and
Right.
poetry as a literary form. But imagine once the lockdown opens and one is able to travel. If I'm in a poetry festival, I invite Heather too, and we both sing on the stage. The evening events often are concerts. Vice versa, if there's a music concert, I can go and read my poetry and she sings. You can do tours. It's just so multifaceted, and the whole thing opens up in a different kind of way. And
Right.
because now we are so internet dependent, of course, there's this whole streaming broadband speed issue, but we should have figured this out that America has the best speeds. So we should have actually just streamed it from Heather's end. The Calcutta has the worst speed, I have to say. Delhi is
I have to laugh because we have our Oberlin. In our city we have what's called a co-op, and we don't have a commercial provider. We have our own system within the city, so we can pay our workers a reasonable wage, and it's not bad. We had to pay a little bit more to get the better speed, but with all the teaching that I've been doing online and everything, I'm very grateful for it right now. So I'm very glad that we had a good speed for this. So
yeah. No, but what happens is, with the internet and with this various forms, it just takes this to another set of audience. So the poetry will reach a musical audience. The herb singing will reach the poetry, and in any case, in live festivals which I've gone to and go to, and all the evening events tend to be music events. So there are bands and singers who come, sing. So I can see a lot of fun things happening, and just traveling together, exploring different countries. So possibilities are limitless post-pandemic.
Post-pandemic. So we are actually expecting so many things from you. Some more songs, music videos, and touring. And when we will see these, we are just waiting for the next videos that you have. So I hope you are soon going to work on those, both of you,
Yeah.
about the new
It's
poems.
very much it's very much ongoing process. So now, yeah. In fact, we worked really hard to get these two things finished because of this program. And sometimes it's good to have a deadline because it pushes you to do it.
That's true.
Yeah. So now that this is done, many things we've learned, which has now become a template. So going forward will be much easier, hopefully. Yeah.
Indeed.
But Heather, it's just such a treat to have you here, and for the huge audience here to listen to you. Yes.
Such an honor to be in working with you and meet you all and get involved with any of this. This is like a real dream for me. Anybody that in my family and in my friends that know me know that I'm bouncing off the walls right now because all I ever talk about is India. If I get a chance to go there, watch out. I'm gonna be so happy. So
I think
Yeah,
that's
and
possible in a post-pandemic
oh
time.
yeah, just
That's
just
possible.
the language, the culture, the poetry, the music, everything. Just
So now you know someone in Delhi, you know someone in Calcutta. So at least
so lucky.
two cities you can see properly. Yes.
Yes, I just feel very, very fortunate to be involved with any of this at all. So I thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you so much for joining us. So that will bring us almost, we are going to the last part of our session today. But then one more question, which I'll just add, because we talked about LitFests, because we talked about your editorial responsibilities as well, and your keen eye for details, as you have been talking to us. Of course, as an editor, that is inevitable that you have this keen eye for details. So, do you think in any case for the lit fests they become platform for new talents to come up in, especially in terms of how we see poetry, Indian English poetry, world poetry, global poetry. So, in any case, how do you think that lit fests can be one such zone?
Yeah, so as you know, literature festivals India became very, very big, and it was huge. It was like an industry. And the world's biggest free festival is held in India, the Jaipur Literature Festival.
Oh wow.
That is, it's, if anybody hasn't been to that festival, they must, just, it's just an amazing experience, you see. Yeah, no, no, everybody is welcome. It's free.
I
The
should.
only thing you have to do is, make sure you book your hotels well in
Right.
advance, because you just can't get accommodation in the city. So it's like that. There are so many festivals, and so what it does is it allows writers to mingle. It allows younger writers to see the masters in action. So all in all, it's a good win-win situation, because the publishers can sell their books, the authors can showcase their talent, the young people can sort of learn from their colleagues. All the evening programs and music programs and networking programs. It's also so much fun, just to sit and get to know other people. You make new friends, or you make some enemies as well, but mostly you make some friends, and regardless of because downtime is important, because otherwise
Hmm.
what you see of is only the sort of professional face,
Hmm.
which in most cases is good enough. But you just the community of writers and artists is important. So yes, I think they're very, very useful. But sadly, right now it's all virtual, so we have to just contend with this. And
All these
all over
festivals
the
and
world, it's like this. Yeah.
all
So
over the world,
Yes.
it's the
yeah.
same thing that's
So
there.
it's one of those situations where everybody is suffering similarly, in that sense that it's all virtual. Some now people are slowly getting to hybrid programs, partly in person with social distancing, and the rest online. Let's see where it goes. But also, the virtual thing has opened up different avenues. I mean, we wouldn't be doing this had it been a normal life. You would probably, or maybe you would have the budget to fly me to Kolkata to do the program, but it involves a lot more expense for you. Hotels,
Yeah.
fees. Here,
Yeah.
somehow you're getting us free. We're all happy, sitting in our homes,
Yeah.
doing it. So there are all these things. There are pluses and minuses to everything. But yes, I
All
mean,
those virtual meets, all those virtual poetry sessions, and the best thing is people are hearing each other. The poetry across the world in multilingual
Wonderful.
poetry sessions also that we
yeah.
see
And also,
across the
hopefully, to it answers one of your earlier questions. It allows people to see the good from the bad. It
exactly.
really becomes evident. If it's not up to the mark, it becomes evident.
It's exactly that, because they're watching live. They're watching live, and even the question answer sessions, the way the perspectives that a poet has, that becomes very certain, like how and where we are talking about poetry and how we differentiate. So that
Yeah, and
filtration
you
part
can't get
is
away with
very
it
important.
either, because you can, if you can revisit it and critique it really well and just figure out how good or bad it is even later
Absolutely,
on. So
absolutely.
people have the time and luxury to sort of see it in depth if they're interested. Yeah. So,
On
but yeah.
that note, yes, we will also hear one more poem from you.
Okay. Okay. So
Your
yeah, we could.
favorite poem from Anthropocene, or like
Oh, my
I should
favorite
not.
poem.
Yes, yes, yes. If there is any.
Well, see, all these poems in the book are my babies, so I don't have a hierarchy of how to grade the babies. But I'll read out the poem which was there in the film. That is, it's dedicated to my son, and it's actually a very, very short poem. It's amazing what Heather has done to this poem. It's just astonishing what she's done. But yeah, it goes like this, and that is spelled I.E. and then in brackets that is. That is because you hear the sound of a lone rustling leaf. You hear the sea. That is because I consider the sea silent. You hear its silence in my studio. That is, and because of that, the silence will not empty the sea of its leaves. Okay.
This is nice how we are actually reading it. And then again, if I just go back, since I was part of this whole session, I think I should wait for some more numbers to come up for the music videos.
No, I can read Banyan, and you'll be transfer. It's a different world.
You should read Banyan. I'm requesting you if you can. Yes, please.
Yeah, let me find it. See, this is something that I didn't plan, but hey, I have to find the page because it was not on the script. Banyan. Yeah. As winter secrets melt with the purple sun, what is revealed is electric. Notes tune unknown scales, syntax alters tongues, terracotta melts white, banyan ribbons into armatures as branch roots twist, meeting soil in a circle. Circuits glazed on the cloth carry alphabets for a calligrapher's nib, italicized in invisible ink. Letters never posted, cartographer's map uncharted. As phrases fold, so do veils.
Love the images.
Again, the way that we are listening to Banyan here, and then how it was transporting us to yet another world when the song was there. So the two different worlds, as you said. Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And the thing I want to just add, we didn't, when she was making the films, obviously a lot of her imagery in the visual rendition is Western. So when she says, in my studio, I don't have a pine wood studio with this beautiful forest in front of me and pouring tea, the visual you see in the poem. I wish I had that. But it doesn't matter if the words are strong and if the music is strong, it becomes universal. Notes, tune, unknown scales, syntax, alter tongue. I had classical Indian music in my head, instruments. And then here you see Western stringed instruments. So the whole idea is, once it transcends borders and works across cultures, that's when it's really successful. Because people can relate to the universality of it as well as the specificity of it.
Yes,
absolutely. That's the thing.
Because I think my imagery is very, very tight and very specific. That's something that I work a lot on. So yeah, it's been a treat.
Elements of Anthropocene, they actually talk a lot about this. When you just come to the poems one by one, you talked about this post-pandemic world, and hope is the only thing that can perhaps sustain us in these tough times. And your poems, the last part, if we go to the last part of Anthropocene, we see that there is this tendency constantly for this peace, the hope, the doldrum situation that was there, and then gradually when we are moving toward an arena that contains only hope, that is what we can do. Nothing is there in our hand. That is what we can do after a certain time. So that
I think but it's important to remember a lot of it is in our hand, in the sense that we have to change our lifestyle partly to get into that. But yes, but we also have to surrender to the larger universe. That is also important equally. It's a
This is
combination of letting your soul fly and at the same time be disciplined and honest.
I
You
think
know.
that also calls for patience. The last part, when we go, the kind of rumbling effects that we have in the initial portions, or the kind of tension that is brewing up constantly in the
Yeah,
initial ones. But the last few poems, when it's settling down, it's more about this inner peace, delving
yeah,
deeper into that zone of inner peace, which is there. What
yeah,
I found while
yeah,
reviewing Anthropocene and reading
yeah,
the poems. So
yeah,
that
yeah.
inner peace is very important after that stage of turmoil that's already there, so we are already living in it, so that part is important. And when we releasing this by the I mean within a this month only, we are releasing today only, so Lit Infinite, the book review portion, when it's reaching out to people, they will of course read this and come up, of course, booking and everything that will go. If we can share the link on Facebook page for the book, that will of course happen, but these segments will remain how they are seeing it, so that that kind of gesture, the change in stance from the initial portions, and
Yeah,
then gradually when it's the settling mood that's there. So
yeah,
I think Anthropocene is really going to give them this deeper insight, how it ends and how it starts, and the beginning, middle, and end, and that cyclical motion that's very important for us. We do read, our students reading, many scholars have already started downloading the pages, so that is
yeah.
for one information that I like to share. And across
Good.
the world,
Good.
since Late Infinite is archived in more than 75 international universities,
That's beautiful.
including Harvard University, Princeton University, and we are also talking with Oxford if they can include this as part of their library, and I think that will be done already within this month. So a large number of people across the continent, they are reading our journal, and they're going through the reviews, they're going through the research papers and everything. So any suggestion or message or anything, any good wish that you have for our Lit Infinite journal? That is what I mean. That
No, first
I
of
can
all,
ask
first,
for your
yeah,
best
yeah,
wishes.
yeah. I have every good wish for your magazine and your readers, of
Mm,
course, and you, particularly because you're sort of single-handedly doing this, which is quite something apart from your
Wonderful.
academic work and family and everything else. I know how difficult these things are when you're doing 100 different things and you're passionate about everything. Um, but yes, so what it comes across as, it's a serious academic journal, which is what you set it out to be. But today, I think we've added another dimension, the creative side to
the
your
creative
journal.
part.
So
Yes.
perhaps in the future, um, I wouldn't want to change the tone of your magazine because it's largely a serious academic journal and it should stay that way. But maybe a small portion where you have,
Some
original
creative corner.
poetry, short stories, and now
Hmm.
because it's online, you can have videos and song links. So you
Hmm.
suddenly that window can be expanded. You know,
Hmm.
so
Right,
that
right.
would be a small addition. And the only other thing I would say, because I've seen so many journals come up and go, and been associated with so many. Please make sure that you're very rigorous all the time. Keep the standards high. If your friend writes a bad paper, then he or she doesn't get in just because they know you.
That is
So just keep,
exactly,
keep
that
yeah,
is one of the reasons that I have been much unpopular with people who
yeah,
have been
yeah.
Oh,
sending
right.
You'll be unpopular. It's something that I'm telling you from my experience. I use it in a sort of ironic way, enemies. But when I'm doing these big anthologies, there's so many people I can't have. In any case, I can't have everybody in there, including many people I like. And not every person I like who's a poet is a good poet. They are sometimes very good people, but not very good writers, and that becomes a problematic thing.
That is something that actually
Without
people who
ego.
are watching the show
Yeah.
today, they should learn this, because as I told you,
And at the
this
same,
flurry of
and the flip side is, when I did the HarperCollins book,
Mhm.
there are two or three people in there who publicly people know we don't get along. But I just felt that, they should be in the book because they are actually good poets. And they were themselves surprised to see themselves in there. So when you're doing a project, just you have to be very fair and, dispassionate about everything else. So that would be my advice. I mean, you've got a long way to go. You're a young academic and lots of dreams. So I think it's going to flourish as long as keeping these two things. Just maintain the quality. Eventually, these people will come back to you, because if it's successful, they'll all come back to you. So
That's such a wonderful. I mean, this actually touched my heart. This actually inspired. This is what I can say, because this quality maintenance, for this only, you have so many people who actually say that we are sending papers which are not of good quality, but then if you reject, you are in some other zone for them.
yeah,
But then I need to maintain that standard and quality
you
of the
have to.
journal.
I do. I mean,
Yes, considering the international audience, considering the scholars, how much output I'm giving through that journal. So
So, and
scholars
if
will, of
you
course,
and if you do
yeah.
that, you will have a lot of goodwill of serious
Mhm,
artists and writers, and automatically you'll grow in a different way. You
mhm,
see, that we become ambassadors for your journal.
mhm,
That's the biggest free gift you can get. That
mhm,
if we are all watching, we are introduced to this
mhm,
journal, and if you keep a
mhm.
standard, then someone says, "Where can we send our work?" Then I say, "Okay, this is a
Absolutely.
possibility. Try it." So that's really how it works. In most things. But yeah, you have to be firm. Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's almost time that
Yes.
we
Yeah.
have, but then the show went so smooth. If we just not consider the technical glitches for some time, but it was like general session talking about poetry, music. It was such a lovely session talking to both of you. And before we end this show, any message for our readers, for our audience today, those who are watching the show, from both of you?
Heather.
Any message for our audience? Any
I have a
song, any
message, I
poem, any
guess.
message?
I
Yes.
went back at 40 to get my master's degrees and start teaching and doing all this stuff. And so, my message to anybody out there is just to do not let negative people in your life or people that don't believe in your dreams stop you from doing what you want to do. Um, do what your heart tells you to do. You don't want to look back on your life and not do the things that you had always wanted to, what your passions are. Don't waste your time doing things that don't make you happy. This whole thing makes me very happy, and I always tell this to my students, and just that message, and read Anthropocene, expand your mind, check out Lit Infinite Journal. If you don't understand something, don't be afraid to say, I don't understand this, and then be curious. I think the great thing about magazines like yours and books like yours and discussions like this is that it's not a bad thing to say, I don't know anything about that, I want to learn about it. Just continue to foster the curiosity, for anybody out there, whether you've been well published or you're brand new to it. Just be curious and try things, ask questions. If you don't understand something, find out, learn about it. That's all I have.
True. True.
No, that's very well put. I mean, I don't think I can add anything to it. I agree with it all. And the fact that three diverse people are meeting for the first time online, and we're talking about serious things, and we are consistently, one thing that has connected us is our smile.
Hmm.
People must be thinking that we are very old friends, and the world is all hunky dory. So that's a great takeaway too. That you can positively and effectively with a smile do a lot of things
That's right.
well and yeah. But
That's really
thank you very much for having me, and thank you for letting Heather join us.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
and so
thanks
Heather,
to
the
both
real
of
treat.
you. Yes.
It's a real
It,
treat, Heather. I have to put it publicly to collaborate with you together, and can't wait. This whole next year is going to be so exciting.
I know, I'm
Yeah,
so grateful for the whole thing. I can't even begin to describe it.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
still wake up and going, what's going on? So,
so we are waiting for next year these new projects to come up, so that we can again, maybe if time permits, if it's again the same smooth thing from all three sides, then we can maybe again sit for another session and discuss those new projects that are in
Yeah.
the pipeline now.
Yeah.
Right.
indeed.
So that,
When we do the album, we'll come and do a show with you. Yeah,
Yep.
that's
yeah,
guaranteed.
great,
Yep,
great,
we will.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That will be so nice.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay.
So
Thank you so much.
I think today it's time for our guests also to wrap up, for me to wrap up. So this is telling good night to all our audience today. thanks to Sudeep sir for joining us today. Thanks to Heather for joining us today. It was really lovely having both of you on our show today.
Thank you
Thank you
so much.
so much. Keep blessing us, and your good wishes should be with us.
Good wishes as well.
Yes.
Thank you
All
so
the very
much.
best.
Thank
Stay
you, sir.
safe.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye, everyone.